Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1116 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. Once again, this is just another masterful chapter from Oda. And it's masterful because of how self-contained it is. It's going to be a chapter that, when we reach the conclusion of the story, and we go back and we read it, we'll realize that all the questions that it poses are actually answered within the chapter itself, in my opinion. Basically, this is a huge flex that Oda already knows what he's going to do with the story. He already knows how he's going to utilize these things, how he's going to end it. And so it's just so easy to create something that you can read between the lines. But I might be getting ahead of myself a little bit here, alright, I know. I'll justify this more in just a second. But to start off with, this feels like we're nearing the conclusion of Dr. Vegapunk's speech. There's really not much else that he has left to say. The only really big reveal that I could see being tied to this would be the reveal of Emu, and Vegapunk seemingly is not aware of this person. And overall, I think that this fits with the tone of the chapter. It's like Vegapunk has already dropped his metaphorical bomb, and here we see him dealing with the consequences of it, mentally and emotionally. Basically, in this chapter, we don't learn anything new about the world or its dangers. That was all explained in the last chapter. A flood threatens the world. Instead, the glue that seems to be holding everything together is how Vegapunk feels responsible for bringing this threat back to the world, because he created the Mother Flame. So really, this chapter is just an absurd amount of little details. Vegapunk re-explains that his goal with the Mother Flame was always to fuel society's development. To him, the Mother Flame was a pathway to global peace, but he knows that part of the Mother Flame was stolen and used wrongly. I brought this up on several occasions recently, but this is one for one. This should remind you of the ancient weapon Pluton and the blueprints that the makers of Pluton passed down. And it should also remind you of Franky's flashback from Water 7. Which is a fitting parallel because Franky, just the same as Vegapunk, he may be lesser than, but he is also an inventor, responsible for the creation of powerful, useful, and potentially dangerous technology. But anyway, Tom and Iceberg explain with the blueprints of Pluton, the reason that they were passed down is because the makers of the Pluton feared what they had created falling into the wrong hands and used wrongly. The blueprints existed so that somebody else could create something that would destroy it. This in and of itself implies that the makers of Pluton never intended for the Pluton to be used as a world-destroying weapon. This is precisely what has occurred with Dr. Vegapunk and the Mother Flame. It is a one-for-one comparison Oda obviously intends for us to compare them. And it's all because you can think about Vegapunk as the modern-day creator of the ancient weapons. This is so perfect in a number of different ways, but one way that I want to highlight is a common quote that you will see thrown out there, is that those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. With the Void Century, history has been forgotten. People are unable to learn from it. Vegapunk may know more than the vast majority of people who exist, but he does not know everything. So not knowing the full history means that he was doomed to repeat it. He made the very same mistake as the makers of Pluton. And again, we'll talk about the end of the chapter more as we get there, but this really explains Vegapunk's frustration at the Roger Pirates. I mean, to be straight up, Vegapunk essentially accuses them of doing nothing when they should have done something. I think that he rightly believes that if the Roger Pirates had shared what they had discovered, they would have revealed that the ancient weapons capable of destroying the world were powered by something similar to the Eternal Flame or the Mother Flame, meaning that Vegapunk, after having created this, would maybe have been a bit more cautious. But anyway, the title of this chapter was Conflict, and I think that that fits the theme of the chapter extremely well, because within it, Vegapunk is describing this like intrinsic conflict. His desire for humanity's progress is a double-edged sword, because the things that they could create that would actually lead to this progress are so stupidly powerful. They can also destroy the world. And by the way, this should absolutely remind you of Nolan and Kalgra's flashback as well, because that was a big component of Nolan, that he was striving for progress, and he felt like the Shandians, their rituals, their traditions, actively set themselves and humanity itself back. Meanwhile, the Shandians believed that if they shirked their traditions and their rituals, that it would lead to the destruction of the world. So progress in the eyes of the Shandians is potentially catastrophic. That is the conflict. I think that a quote from Stephen Hawking comes to mind. He said that most of the threats that we face come from the progress we've made in science and technology. We are not going to stop making progress or reverse it, so we must recognize the dangers and control them. But overall, I find it to be an interesting discussion, and it seems like that is what Oda wants us to discuss. And if you really wanted to, you could go even deeper into the Nolan and Kagura flashback to get a better sense of where Oda might be going with this. Because we know that Nolan was right. He actually did have the cure for their curable disease. He knew what was causing it, and he fixed the problem. But you could legitimately look back on history, see what happened to the Shandians, and think, wow, by an act of God, the Shandians were punished. It isn't a totally unrealistic thought for religious people or the Shandians themselves to have had. Their island was hurled into the sky, and they were left for generations of suffering. But is it because they did not pray properly to their gods that this occurred? No. And you could even argue that this actually spared them from a worse fate, because Nolan went back to his homeland where he talked to the king of his kingdom, and the king was about to go to Chandora and do himself a little genocide anyway. So the knockup stream might have saved their people, even though it probably looked a lot like a punishment. But anyway, I don't want to confuse anybody. This is a pretty wild tangent, just something to think about. The unknown by nature carries risks. Progress as it explores this unknown does the same. Like, humanity just simply can't predict all of the nuances of the future, and this is even true for the hypothetical smartest man in the world. But ultimately, I think that it is a good guess to assume or to speculate that the story of One Piece is going to advocate for progress, right? Like, regardless of these dangers, we should still do that. That's a good thing. But applying this to Dr. Vegapunk as a character is also intriguing just because he's a perfectionist. The tiniest of faults in the things that he invents makes him want to throw it out. Oh, Momonosuke is a pink dragon, not a blue dragon. Failure. So as I see it, this is in essence a failure of Vegapunk's development of the Mother Flame, that he did not see what it would become and how it would be used. And you can understand how much that might personally affect him. Honestly, it made me a little emotional just following the chapter and just realizing that Vegapunk absolutely thinks that he has doomed the world. And it's a pretty incredible regret to die with. And I think the reality is that this message is not playing. The world does not hear Vegapunk's thought unless he has come to this conclusion. But while he blames himself, he does not solely blame himself. And that's when we get to the end of the chapter, which felt frustrated. He asked out loud a question that we have asked on the channel recently, which is that if Joy Boy knew that the ancient weapons destroyed the world, if during his lifetime the world was catastrophically flooded and countless people died, why in the world would you preserve these weapons? Why would you leave a means in order to find them, discover them again? And for Roger and the Roger pirates who discovered these secrets, why would you not tell people about it, warn them? If the fate of the entire planet is at stake, the people kinda gotta know. But Vegapunk's a smart guy, and based on everything that I've seen, I wouldn't really describe him as biased. So yes, in part he's maybe blaming them, or frustrated. But the other half of this is a legitimate question, something that Vegapunk does not know and does not understand. There might be a reason. So do you guys want me to spoil you as to the reason? Why did Joy Boy preserve these weapons? Why didn't Roger tell everybody the moment that he found out? I think that the probable theory here is that the reason is hope and faith. And I think that this is laid out through contextual clues in the chapter itself. But biggest among all of these is the Mother Flame. Why did Vegapunk create it in the first place? It was to create a better future. As we've already said, Vegapunk is the modern day creator of the ancient weapons. You should think about him like the makers of Pluton. The creators of Pluton did not design it in order to destroy the world. It had some other purpose. It was a part of a larger dream, just like the Mother Flame. So there is likely a way to use the Pluton in order to make the world a better place. There is a right way to use the Pluton. And I use this wording very purposefully because this is the same conversation that we get about Shirahoshi and Poseidon. Queen Odahime tells us and tells her that there is a right way in order to utilize her powers, and somebody will appear one day in order to guide her down this path. At this point, I think basically everyone believes, and it is incredibly likely, that Joy Boy is very similar to Luffy. And what is Luffy? Luffy is a dreamer, and he is a believer. Our boy gets a dream in his head, he gets a thought in his head, and he believes it 1,000,000%. There is never a moment that he can even allow the possibility that what he wants isn't going to happen. So it's really easy to just apply this to Joy Boy. The ancient weapons were a component of Joy Boy's dream for a better future, in ways we may not understand now and may not understand for many years going into the future. 'future. But it's because Joy Boy believes in this future and has that hope that that he preserved the ancient weapons, most likely, so that they can eventually fulfill the purpose that they were created for. But it's for the same reason that the Roger Pirates did not share this information when they received it. Rayleigh said at the end of the chapter that maybe he had already said too much. And the reason here is that they not only know about this future that Joy Boy likely dreamed of, they also know how Joy Boy saw it being accomplished. The right person, aka Luffy, is supposed to discover this and utilize the weapons. Before then, telling the world about them doesn't do any good. As Rayleigh told the Straw Hats in Sabaody, I could tell you the truth, but as you are now, there is nothing that you can do about it. It is then up to Luffy and the crew and his friends, once they discover it, what to do with that information. Do you follow what it is that Joy Boy suggests, or do you do something else? That is your decision to make, and a decision best made when you know everything. And I find this conversation to be fascinating because Vegapunk is essentially doing now what the Roger Pirates, with more information, decided not to do. I'm not going to call it a mistake, because everything that happens in the story of One Piece is kind of destined at this point in time, and we basically know how the story is supposed to end. This is all part of the plan. But I definitely think that you could argue that Vegapunk is being a little arrogant here, assuming that he knows what is best. And you could probably argue that the Roger Pirates, despite not being the literal most intelligent person or people on the planet, that they were perhaps wiser. You better believe that it is intentional on Oda's part to pan to characters like Crocodile during this chapter, because it emphasizes that beyond the chaos that Vegapunk's message, like what that will cause, as he's also inspiring people to pursue the ancient weapons. This is akin to the One Piece is real moment, but specifically targeted at people who want weapons capable of destroying the world. Knowing practically for sure that this power exists is only going to inspire more people who plan to use it wrongly to pursue it. That's just reality. But anyway, I just want to rapid fire some of my thoughts related to this as I read the chapter. Ultimately, Vegapunk's pursuit of the forbidden knowledge resulted in his creation of the Mother Flame, which itself resulted in the deaths of many people, and potentially the destruction of the world. So I think that it's fitting, and Oda was very purposeful in panning to the funeral of Nefertari Cobra at the beginning of the chapter. Nefertari Cobra, who asked questions related to the Void Century. He pursued this knowledge, and it resulted in his death. Also, the attempted murder of his family, and likely the destruction of his country. I think that that's coming soon. It just makes an absurd amount of logical sense right now for Imu to turn the weapon, if he uses it again, turn the weapon on Alabasta. That country is a problem that needs to be erased, especially if they begin to look into the death of Cobra, or could potentially discover this truth at any point in the future. Vivi. I think all of this is also related to Stussy's actions in the chapter as well. Stussy is freeing and protecting Kaku in the same way that Joy Boy freed or protected the ancient weapons. Kaku, similar to the ancient weapons, is a danger. He's a threat, and it might backfire. So this is what Stussy says. I don't want him to suffer the consequences of this. Don't worry, I won't let him go after the Strats. But I don't think that pursuing them will be his priority anyway. Basically, Stussy believes and has faith in Kaku to do the right thing. So I want you to imagine this in your head. I want you to flip some characters around. Imagine that Stussy is Joy Boy, and I want you to imagine that Kaku is Poseidon from the Void Century. Joy Boy says, I don't want her to suffer the consequences of this. The world clearly wants to destroy the ancient weapons. Poseidon is one of the ancient weapons. I don't want her to die. I don't want them to kill her. But don't worry, I won't let her destroy the world, and I don't think that the destruction of the world will be her priority anyway. So do you guys see how I think that this scene is related to the overall subject that Oda is trying to describe? I know it isn't precisely the same, but I think that it's written so that you are capable of reading between the lines. Now I want you to imagine that Edison is Joy Boy's friends. And maybe more accurately, you could potentially imagine that Edison is Nefertari Lily. At the conclusion of the war between Joy Boy and the 20 Kingdoms, Lily discovers the truth. Joy Boy reveals the truth to her so that she finally understands everything that is going on. This is why she betrayed Imu and the world government. Important in this is the assumption that Lily founded the 20 Kings as an alliance for good purposes. This is what she says. I understand, Joy Boy, and I'm sorry for putting you through all this. It didn't occur to me that the ancient weapons were your friends. Forgive me for making you turn on them. And this might strike you as a weird thing to say, but the reality is that at the conclusion of the Void Century, the ancient weapons were all imprisoned in various ways. Pluton and Wano, and Poseidon, the fishman, and the merfolk under the ocean. It's essentially an underwater prison, kind of like Impel Down. Putting them there is probably not what Joy Boy wanted to do. And of course, Joy Boy left her an apology. So I do think that it's fair to speculate that Joy Boy did turn on the ancient weapons despite them potentially being his friends. Since the Void Century, they have not been free. But yeah, we're kind of glossing over this because I explained this in the last review, but there's this conversation about Joy Boy, like why would he preserve these weapons? It's so much easier if you just believe that all of the ancient weapons are in some way sentient beings. My theory from the last review is that, Poseidon is obviously Poseidon, that is Shirahoshi, she is a person. Pluton is a Kalbautramon and was the ship of the Joy Boy pirates that gain sentience, and like the Going Merry or the Thousand Sunny is a legitimate crew member. And then Uranus might have been something akin to Frankie, a person who has made themselves fully robotic. Or maybe you can think about a person similar to Dr. Vegapunk who is now just a brain. And perhaps like Kuma, they have lost their free will, their consciousness. But yeah, it doesn't have to be true that all the ancient weapons are literally living beings, but it makes the conversation easier, and I think that it relates to what we've been talking about here. Ultimately, the simplest solution to explain why a character like Luffy would preserve weapons capable of destroying the world is that they were his friends, on top of any other possible reason. But shout out to Tom and his line to Frankie that an inventor should love their creations and should never turn on them. But so let's continue, and this gets a little bit more headcanon-y, but I want to include it anyway. Nefertari Lily continues talking to Joy Boy, and she says this: "Despite being torn between both sides, Joy Boy, you still rescued us. That inner conflict is proof of your humanity. My theory has been that Joy Boy was betrayed by a member of his faction, his crew, his country, the ancient kingdom, however you want to look at it. Joy Boy is Odin, and he was betrayed by somebody like Orochi. So ultimately, the battle between the 20 kingdoms and the ancient kingdom is a battle between the 20 kingdoms and an Orochi-like figure. You should be thinking about the ancient kingdom during the Void Century as being similar to the country of Wano. Meanwhile, Joy Boy is caught in the middle, just as Odin was in Wano, unable to act for reasons the people did not understand. He was obviously betrayed, therefore is not aligning with this Orochi-like figure, but at the same time, the 20 kings want to destroy the ancient weapons that Joy Boy is friends with and wants to preserve. So in this case, Joy Boy is torn between both sides and is really an enemy to both. But Lily thanks him for saving them regardless, which is absolutely something that Luffy would do under the same circumstances. But I don't want to get too lost in the headcanon here. I just want to end on this point, which is that overall this leads to discussion about Stussy's humanity because Stussy is a creation of science. We are relating Stussy to Joy Boy right now, and I wonder if this same thing holds true for the actual Joy Boy. We know that he is from the ancient kingdom, but could it be true that Joy Boy, similar to Stussy, is a creation of the advanced kingdom, and therefore is his humanity somewhat in question? At the very least, I find this to be an interesting thought, and I personally do think that all the races of the One Piece world were bioengineered. Poseidon being a weapon doesn't make sense because she's a race, but maybe the whole race itself is a creation of science. Therefore, this conversation about Stussy's humanity, even though she is simply a clone, would fit with them, would it not? I think so. And straight up, I just think that this theme fits for the Void Century, now that we know for sure that the Ancient Kingdom was as advanced as it is. This naturally leads to conversations about the nature of humanity. What is life and what is the soul? And is probably the biggest thing that sci-fi discusses. Literally, I swear to you, half of the stories out there are robots' life. And what does it mean that we created them? But let's flip gears and talk about Vegapunk himself, because he explained in the chapter very specifically how he came to these conclusions and how he collected his data and also what he knows. And he said some interesting things. Firstly, he reveals that a small fragment of his mother flame was stolen, which is by itself kind of an interesting idea. I don't know how a small fragment of the flame could be stolen, but clearly that's a thing. And of course, from the moment that he said it, we already knew who did it. It was York. But that was also explained in the chapter, and we got some context. Vegapunk tells us that the motives and origin of the perpetrators who stole the mother flame are a mystery to him. Basically, Vegapunk reveals that he was never aware that York was responsible. Which is like, okay, cool, kind of fits, but it also kind of doesn't. Honestly, we've been saying this for the last couple of weeks, but York expressed my thoughts. She says, hang on, how is this possible, Stella? How could you have known about me stealing a fragment of the Mother Flame? I cut off my memory synchronization. It should have been impossible. Not only that, but I know for a fact you're a terrible liar and a lousy actor. You were genuinely surprised, but you got news about Lolosia and took readings? What does this mean? When the timeline doesn't add up, you must have known about the government's plans. Otherwise, you wouldn't have done all of this. You wouldn't have hidden the broadcast snail. In this, we have everything that we need to come to a very logical conclusion. York knows the Stella well. She knows that he is not a good liar. He is not a good actor. Anything that came out of his mouth about being surprised that she betrayed him is genuine. Yet he has all these cleverly laid plans revolving around it that he kept hidden from her. How is it possible for Vegapunk to be on one hand suspicious of her and on the other hand not suspect a thing? I mentioned this theory in a review a couple chapters ago, but I think that this chapter essentially confirms it, that the Stella Vegapunk that we know was not actually the Stella. I think that the real Vegapunk is the brain, Punk Records, which makes a stupid amount of sense to begin with because it is literally the majority of Vegapunk's actual brain. For this to make sense, York must not be able to prevent synchronization with the actual Vegapunk brain itself. Stopping synchronization just prevents her experiences and her knowledge going to the other Vegapunk alters, not the brain. So the brain knew what she did. It didn't reveal to the Stella who was responsible. It just pointed out the crime. And honestly, I just find all of this to be a fascinating conversation and add a layer of cool to all of Egghead that the brain is essentially the mastermind. But it does so in highly manipulative ways and seems to not, like its existence is not even known by the alters themselves. They don't seem to believe that it is sentient because they thought that the body was the Stella. And this all makes Vegapunk, like the brain itself, come off as even smarter. Like it knew that when it separated itself into alters and each of the alters had particular aspects of his personality, that these aspects might betray him. And because they're himself and so smart, if they knew that the brain knew, then they would be able to hide whatever betrayal occurs. So the brain withheld its own existence from all of them. The brain void-centuried itself, as well as the truth that all of the alters were already connected to it always and that this couldn't be prevented. It would always know everything that they do. Am I the only one that loves this? It also adds an incredibly subtle layer of irony to the whole chapter because what Vegapunk is discussing is the consequences of things that he did not know. He made mistakes because he wasn't aware of everything. And likewise here, York made mistakes because of things that she did not know. She was not aware of everything. If you guys are following, this is unbelievably big-brained. Like, straight up, credit where credit is due. Not many people on Earth can write it like this. But I promise you guys, I do understand that the brain being sentient and ruling over, being the mastermind behind everything is, in fact, a theory. But I'm curious if anybody out there, anybody in the comments has a legitimate, plausible theory for how Vegapunk's actions make sense. The contradiction that York spells out in the chapter. What are other possible answers? Because I don't have any others, but I'm not saying that they don't exist. The only thing that I'll say is I highly disagree with you if you think that Vegapunk is just a really good liar. But anyway, I want to make sure that I say this before I forget it because I'm not sure how to connect it with everything else that we're discussing. A thing that comes up in the chapter, at the very beginning of the chapter, in fact, is the idea that how does it make sense that the world is continuing a war that from thousands of years ago? The world ambiguously is kind of posing this question, and of course we know the legitimate answer to it. Emu is from the Void Century. They are 800 plus years old, so this is why the war is ongoing, and that connects all these things. And Oda even panned to Emu the moment that this was said, and we can see that they're looking at a portrait of what is probably Nefertari Lily from the past, which is itself a conversation. Like, are we supposed to be thinking that there might have been a romance between Emu and Lily at some point in time? Because that's immediately where my brain went. Having a portrait of somebody is kind of sus. Emu seems pretty fixated on Lily and also fixated on Vivi for some reason we don't understand. But really what I wanted to do is compare this to something similar that we learned in Wano. Like, this war from the Void Century is continuing 800 years after the last official battle was fought. And this is just like Wano. This is from chapter 953. Kawamatsu is talking to Onimaru. I have no desire to disturb the sleep of the dead either, but 13 years hence, there will be another great war. The day will come when the samurai of the nation stand tall and proud again, and when that happens, we will need a great number of swords. In battle, when your companion dies before your eyes, you take his sword and continue onward. The soul that resides in that katana makes a samurai strong and enables him to destroy his enemies. This is still a battlefield. The battle between the Animal Kingdom pirates and the land of Wano is not yet finished. It's too early to let these swords sleep. So really just apply this on a global scale. The Earth itself is a battlefield, and the battle is not done. But the short interpretation that I have of this is that all of this relates to the inherited will. This is effectively a battle that has been inherited over the generations through most likely the will of D. This is why this battle is not one-sided. The fact that Imu is from the Void Century, yes, that explains why this war is ongoing, but Imu also has an enemy, and this enemy is also still alive. This is collectively the will of D, and individually represented by Luffy, who is somehow Joy Boy. But anyway, some more small thoughts that I had about the chapter, specifically when talking about the Kingdom of Alabasta, right? The disappearance of Vivi and the death of Cobra is going to inspire something in that country. Like those who pursued the truth of the Void Century, they will pursue the truth of the fate of their rulers, because they know for a fact that something is missing. I really think that the Kingdom of Alabasta represents something. And this continues at various points throughout the chapter as we pan to different countries who are listening to Vegapunk and beginning to ask questions. For instance, Vegapunk reveals that he is aware of the disappearance of Lolosia, and those countries that know of Lolosia are like, wait a second, can we confirm this? Is this true? And they should be able to do that. This all relates to our discussions when Vegapunk's message first began. We did not know exactly how far Vegapunk would go, what he would reveal, and what that would inspire. Now we know. Vegapunk's words are going to cause a world war. Vegapunk's words will inspire everyone to seek the truth, and they will be able to discover this enough to declare the world government their enemy. Likewise, Vegapunk is revealing things that beforehand Imu and the Gorosei were willing to erase people for. To cover this up, they have to erase the entire world, and it seems well within their characters and motivations to do so. So long story short, my speculation is that we are about to see something that is equivalent to the original formation of the 20 Kings during the Void Century. Led by Alabasta, I believe that there will be an alliance of actual kingdoms that will declare the world government their enemy. The world government in this case is comparable to the ancient kingdom. But I suppose I explained this in the wrong order. The first thought that everyone in the world should have right now is that the ancient weapons are incredibly dangerous, and clearly if Lolosia is destroyed, one is on the loose. Somebody somewhere possesses it. However, Vegapunk does not actually reveal that it's Imu, the Gorosei, and the world government. So right now the world does not have a specific reason to target the government as their enemy. What is most likely to be the final nail in the coffin is probably the Revolutionary Army. Sabo knows about Imu, and the Revolutionary Army know that Lolosia was partial to the revolution, which is the direct enemy of the world government, and they're collecting all of the receipts. So this brings us back to Alabasta, the search for the truth regarding Cobra and Vivi. Possibly Vivi just straight up returns to Alabasta, but ultimately I see the Kingdom of Alabasta leading the coalition and alliance formed directly against the world government. Your modern day 20 Kings, very similar to the organization that Lily probably created during the Void Century. And don't be surprised if the number of kingdoms equals 20 exactly. Apologize for explaining this in the wrong way. I hope that makes sense. But of course, foundational to this alliance would be the pursuit and destruction of the ancient weapons, because that information is going to leak, that the world government has an ancient weapon. They are the ones that destroyed Lolosia, so this is what this alliance is all going to be about. Once again, the destruction of the ancient weapons because they are too dangerous. And what does Vivi not know? Vivi doesn't know exactly what the ancient weapons are. She just knows that they exist and that they're a danger to the world. She doesn't know that Shirahoshi, a friend of hers, in fact, is one of them. This, my friends, is a juicy plotline. And once again, for Vivi or for Lily to know the truth, right, this has to come from Joy Boy or Luffy. And while we're here, right, if Vivi and Alabasta become the leaders of this coalition of kings that are against the world government, what is a king that we know almost for a fact that is going to be a part of their organization? This alliance. Wapol of Black Drum Kingdom. Almost for a fact. So our guy Wapol for sure has totally pure motives and is definitely a trustworthy guy, right? There's no way that this ends poorly. But if you guys aren't catching on, right, basically what we're speculating is that Lily from the Void Century allied herself with some questionable folk. Some kings whose motivations were not as pure and as for justice as her. And this is part of what happened at the end of the Void Century, leading to the corrupt world government. But anyway, I think that these are the larger speculations that I have about the chapter and how it connects to events that will be described in the future. But there's more specific things from the chapter itself that caught my attention that I feel like we should at least bring up. When we pan to Alabasta, Oda made a point of showing Alubarna as it is built. Like, it's built on top of a mountain. Its design is very particular, and it seems purposeful to me. Lily, at the time of the Void Century, knew that the world would flood. That is why Alubarna is designed the way it is. But we still do not have a mechanism which would allow for the world to forget that this occurred. Forgetting a global flood should be impossible. I don't care how many books you burned. This chapter also made me question just how much the Marines like Sengoku and Akainu know. I've thought this for a long time, but the Marines are very similar to pirates, in the sense that as you become a Marine and as you rise up the ranks, you effectively explore the world and learn its truths. It is impossible to not learn. Basically, Sengoku does not seem as surprised and as shocked and as outraged as you would expect. So it does not seem rational to me to believe that Sengoku is actually surprised at the reveal that the world has flooded. But at the same time, I don't think that Sengoku has had conversations with the Gorosei or with Imu about this. It doesn't make sense to me for them to have explained the Void Century to him. So how exactly would it be reasonable for Sengoku to have already learned this? I wonder if this reveal that is occurring right now with Vegapunk has already occurred within Sengoku's lifetime. I wonder if Rox revealed this already. The difference is that Rox did not reveal this to the entire world, and the government successfully covered it up. So then, assuming this to be true, right, it is then natural to make the assumption that Rock's crew is aware of these secrets, and there's some things, some details scattered around which actually justify this. Big Mom and Kaido's alliance was stated, their stated objective was to acquire the ancient weapons. This itself implies that they know more than they should. We have never learned that Kaido or Big Mom possess the abilities to read the poneglyphs in the same way as the Roger Pirates, yet they know about the ancient weapons. It's curious. Even more than that, when Kaido is first introduced, his stated goal is to destroy the world. With the later alliance of Big Mom and their intention to acquire the ancient weapons, you then have a means for Kaido to actually accomplish this goal. Basically, Kaido might have known exactly how the ancient weapons might destroy the world. And it's easy to forget this as well, but Whitebeard knew a lot, and he revealed that he knew a lot in Marineford. We assumed for years that the reason that Whitebeard knew all of these things and shocked and upset Sengoku so much is because of his conversation with Roger. But maybe Whitebeard actually learned some things from Rox. And this interrelates with another discussion that we've had in the community for more than a decade, which is how exactly did Crocodile know about the ancient weapons? Why did he suspect that information relating to the location of Pluton might be found in Alabasta? That is a very specific thing to know. And it really only makes sense in one of two ways. The Roger pirates who discovered this poneglyph and read it revealed it. That does not seem likely to me. The second possibility is that somebody else found this poneglyph and read it, that we are not currently aware of. This person could have been Rox, and Rox or his crew then possess knowledge about the poneglyph in Alabasta and what it says, so that Crocodile could learn. Honestly, guys, I think that the connections and the conclusions laid out here are pretty tight. I think that you have to recognize that Sengoku and Akainu's reaction to this knowledge is not normal. It itself implies that they were already aware, and we should be asking how they are aware. If it's not Imu, the Gorosei, and it's not the Roger Pirates, we might be missing somebody who got close to the truth and followed the poneglyphs, but was a little bit more open about some of the details. And that is almost exactly what Sengoku said about Rox, that he pursued taboo knowledge. And suddenly details from everywhere start to make sense. And I think that it might recontextualize how we think about Rox and what his crew actually did. And I think that this conversation beautifully ties back to the end of the chapter. Vegapunk focuses on this fact that the Pirate King and his crew Goldie Roger discovered the truth but did not reveal it. Maybe they didn't reveal it in part because of their experience in history regarding the Rocks pirates. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, it is an indisputable fact that Goldie Roger allied himself with the Marines such as Garp and Sengoku to defeat Rocks in God Valley. But anyway, that is pretty much what I had to say about the chapter. Obviously, we learned in addition to this that it seems likely now that the ancient robot is guarding Vegapunk's Dindin Mushi, and so this is how the Egghead Island arc itself is going to wrap up. I'm excited to see it. On one hand, I don't think that Vegapunk really has that much more to say, so it doesn't matter. And on the other hand, I really hope that he has more to say because I'm eating up every moment of this. But regardless, the end is nigh. As always, I'm curious as to what you guys think, whether you noticed something from the chapter that I might have missed, your opinions, your thoughts, just share them. If you want to check out my book, The Booms, link is in the description. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad, and as always, guys, have a wonderful day.